Hi, everyone. Happy Monday to students just coming back on campus virtually. Welcome back. For those of you who have never been to a Pathways discussion before, I'll start by introducing myself. My name's Kelly, and you see here Claire. We are your co-leaders of the Business and Pathways conversations here at CBAE. And the point of the program, the goal of the program is to introduce students in the Yale community to professionals who have a career at the intersection of business and environment, thinking about solutions and ways to address environmental issues at this intersection. And we're really happy to have Katie from Weyerhaeuser here today to do just that. Before I introduce you to Katie and Lydia, one quick plug at the beginning for the rest of the semester, since this is our first programming of the spring semester. This format, webinar format, is going to feel similar to those of you who have went to a couple of these last semester, but we are shifting a little bit to a slightly different small group format where you'll have small group discussions with people like Katie throughout the semester. So keep an eye on look for the CBAE newsletter as well as other channels of information to see when those signups start to begin. Great. Well, let's get started. It's a pleasure to introduce Katie Kava, who is a sustainability manager at Weyerhaeuser, as well as Lydia Jackson, who is a joint degree. Many of you should know her, between the School of Environment and the School of Management. And she worked with Katie this summer, so we're really happy to have Lydia here to add a student perspective to the conversation with Katie. I am not going to go into too much detail introducing Katie because I'm going to let her do a little bit of that herself, and particularly her work at Weyerhaeuser. But just for everyone to know, for some context, prior to Weyerhaeuser, Katie worked in forest restoration work at both the government and nonprofit level, and she also has a BA in biology from Boston College and an MBA focused on sustainability from Seattle University. Thanks so much for joining us today, Katie.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to just hop right into it?
I would love for you to just hop right into it. Make my job easy.
Okay, good. Well, I want to do that. So, hey, everybody. You got a brief introduction to kind of my background, and I think I can go into it a little bit more throughout today's session. But actually, before I introduce myself, I want to take a moment and introduce Weyerhaeuser, which is the company that I work for. I have a hunch that many of you might not be familiar with us as a company, and so I wanted to take just a moment and kind of place some context around the next part of our conversation. So as I'm pulling up a slide that kind of gives an overview of who we are as a company, I will go ahead and say I have been working at Weyerhaeuser on the sustainability team for 4.5 years now. 4.5 years. I was trying to think of when I started. Similar to Lydia, I started as an intern at Weyerhaeuser while I was getting my MBA at Seattle University, and that turned into a full-time position for me, starting as an analyst and now as a manager. I think sometimes it's helpful to understand what career pathways are. At Weyerhaeuser, I work primarily on our forest certification program. So that's supporting the sustainability certifications we have on our timberlands, and then in our manufacturing facilities that we'll talk a little bit about in 1 second. And then I'm also working really closely with our timberlands, wood products, and natural climate solutions business to help integrate sustainability into how we make business decisions and our business processes. So that's a part of our sustainability strategy. And then, as Lydia knows, our sustainability team also has like all these other kind of random small projects. And I also do an internal education series, much like this one for Weyerhaeuser folks that we call Sustainability Live. So that's one of my favorite projects to work on. So that's a little bit about me and what I do at Weyerhaeuser. So I will just start out with who Weyerhaeuser is. So we are a 120-year-old company that originally started in the Pacific Northwest. And today we are the largest private landowner in the United States. We have 3 main business lines. So that's 3 main things we focus on as a business. The first is that we own and manage timberlands for the production of timber. So that's what we refer to as working forests. So those are forests that are being harvested and reforested on a continual cycle. A little bit different than if you went to like a state park or a national forest that's being maintained more in a conservation setting. So we have working forests that also deliver lots of other benefits while we are managing them. And we own and manage about just shy of 11 million acres in the United States. And then we have long-term licenses that cover 14 million acres in Canada. It's a little bit of a confusing situation in Canada because those licenses sometimes overlap in geography. But all of the land that we manage, whether it's land we own or land we have licenses to or leases to, is certified to the Sustainable Forestry Initiative Sustainable Forest Management Standard, which ensures that we are managing that land sustainably. So that's the timberlands part of our business. As you can see on this map, we're really focused up in the Pacific Northwest and then down in the southeastern United States, and then kind of in the New England, northeastern area, and we're kind of scattered throughout Canada. And if you're wondering why we have chosen to operate in those areas, generally those are areas where trees grow fast and very well. We like to say fast, tall, and straight. Then our second business is our real estate, energy, and natural resources business. And I apologize, I have a slightly old slide. This should also include our natural climate solutions business, which we launched just this year. And this is really all the ways that we are realizing benefits from and everything we do with our land while we're growing trees on it, besides the forest management. So what falls into this part of our business, is putting solar panels and solar farms on our land with companies that actually do that. So managing those leases, the installation of wind farms. We do have some natural gas and oil extraction. We also have some quarries where we do mostly gravel. Sometimes we use that in our own operations. Sometimes we have a lease for that. And then our new business, which we're all very excited about, is called our Natural Climate Solutions business. And that's really looking at how we can leverage our forests for natural climate solutions. And so that group is looking into how we can do offsets on our land, how we can increase and grow our mitigation banking program. And so that group's doing some really exciting work. And we're still kind of figuring out exactly what that looks like for us as a company. We have pilot programs going right now, but that is a very exciting thing that we are just starting as a company, and we expect to grow significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. And then finally, we don't just grow trees and harvest them, we also make something out of those logs. And so we have our wood products business. Across the United States and Canada, we have 35 manufacturing facilities. And we as a company make we make solid and not all solid wood products, but building products. So the vast majority of our facilities are lumber mills. And if you're imagining kind of like a black and white picture of people, going to the mill and hand sawing things, I will say one thing that's really amazing about our mills is there is a crazy amount of technology that is employed in our mills. Every single log that comes into a facility gets scanned by a laser to determine the best way to cut it. How can we cut that log to maximize not only the amount of volume in product we get out of it, but also market conditions. So what does the market want right now? 2x4x8s versus 1x1x10. So it's really amazing, all of the algorithms and computers and technology that goes into our mills. In addition to lumber, we make OSB, so that's oriented strand board, plywood, timber strands. So those are all products where you take the log, cut it up into smaller pieces, and then somehow glue it back together, is what I like to say. So those are the three main things we do as a company. We own and manage timberlands. We realize we have other use cases for our lands while our forests are growing. And then we make products that are going into buildings and homes. And really, we like to stay, all of the carbon that is in those products are being stored for the life of that product in use. So that is what we do as a company. And I can just go ahead, and I know you have some questions prepared for me, so I'm going to drop my slide and we'll just take it straight to chatting.
Yeah. Also, Katie, can I hop in? I wanted to just underline something for this audience, because I know this took me a while to wrap my head around a little bit when I was starting last summer. But Katie referred to each of these, what we would probably normally call like divisions or branches of a company, as businesses. And I think that's actually really interesting and important to keep in mind, especially as you're listening to Katie talk about her job and what sustainability looks like at Weyerhaeuser, because they really do operate as different businesses, and it makes the job of being a sustainability team and like pulling these threads together a lot more complicated and a lot more interesting. So I just wanted to underline that so that the group is thinking about that as you continue to talk about the rest of this.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, Lydia. And it's interesting, anytime you work in a large company, so Weyerhaeuser used to be much bigger. We used to also have pulp and paper facilities. I think we had a home building branch of our company. We operated in Uruguay and Poland. So we used to have 40,000 employees, and now we have just shy of 10,000. So we have really streamlined what we do as a company. But still, even with just 3 businesses, we often find as a sustainability team, we have visibility into what we do as an entire company. And that's not always true whenever we start working with individual employees or individual teams across the company. So it is one thing that I think is a wonderful opportunity and a distinct challenge of anyone who works on a sustainability team, is often we're thinking at the whole company level, but having to translate that down to how does sustainability, how does it matter, and how are we going to implement it in specific parts of our company? And that requires lots of translation, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you guys have made a wonderful segue to my first question, which is about the sustainability function in and of itself. I think a lot of students are interested in thinking about what a corporate sustainability career looks like, and have noticed that it can mean a lot of different things at a lot of different places. So I would love to hear a little bit about kind of what does that mean at Weyerhaeuser, and what are the unique opportunities and challenges, as you've already alluded to working in that specific role.
Absolutely. So I always like to say that just because you have sustainability in your title doesn't mean you're the only person in a company doing sustainability work. And especially, I would say, for the role that I'm in, it varies a little bit on our team, but our team spends a lot of time reporting, understanding, and helping to guide work that other people do. That's really the sustainability work on the ground. So there's a lot of people doing sustainability, and perhaps it's a little bit more because we manage forests. We have a very on the ground, operationally focused company. But really, there's so many people at our company that do the on the ground sustainability work. I would say that lends very well to one of the challenges that I think can happen whenever that's presented to folks on sustainability teams, is our foresters on the ground, for instance, they don't necessarily think of what they do as sustainability work. They're like, my job is to manage our forests, to get them to a healthy point where we're ready to harvest them, and then to reforest that land, and then manage them for a whole nother cycle. And they think of that as doing good forestry. So sometimes what we have to do, and this is true also in our wood products teams, it's really common. We say yeah, that's great. You think of managing your forest, you think of building roads with less material. We want to just help translate how that work that you're already doing, these things you're thinking about, often because they're efficiencies, they're saving money, they help our trees grow faster and healthier, and that's our ultimate product as a company. Those all have ties into sustainability. So sometimes we just spend a fair amount of our time helping our teams translate the work that they're doing into how do we think about this for sustainability. And then often there's a whole nother set of translation that we have to do as we're answering questions for our investors or our customers. So we spend a lot of time, I would say, on the sustainability team, thinking about the different audiences that we're connecting with. And that might lend really well into talking about the structure of the corporate sustainability team at Weyerhaeuser. I will just caveat this. Weyerhaeuser is the first company that I've worked in the corporate sustainability team. Before this, as you mentioned, I've worked in city government, and then prior to that, a nonprofit. So I can speak to how Weyerhaeuser's sustainability team is structured, but I don't have a ton of visibility into how other teams do this. But we have a VP who really oversees the strategy of our team and the implementation of our sustainability strategy. And then kind of within our team, we have sub-focus areas. So we have a person on our team who's really focused on reporting. I think this is very common for sustainability teams. She is very focused on investor reporting. So working with our company to gather up the massive amounts of data that any company is going to create, respond to investor questionnaires. And that allows us to get rankings from places like Sustainalytics, CDP, kind of all of the big ratings that our investors pay attention to, in addition to responding to questions that come directly from our investors. So I think it's very common to have someone in a sustainability team that really focuses on reporting. Then I think by the nature of the company that we also have someone on our team who's very focused on climate and carbon. So this year we launched a science-based target that just got approved by the Science Based Target Initiative. And so we spent a lot of time calculating our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we have a person on our team who really has a focus on that. And he also looks at what are the methodologies for calculating carbon in forests and wood products. We have kind of a carbon specific person. And then there's me, and we have one other person on our team. We have two other people on our team that we are sort of embedded in more our operations. So I work really closely with our forest management teams and our sales teams on implementing our sustainability strategy, our sustainability certifications. And then my coworker works really closely with our manufacturing facilities on sustainability certifications, our energy plan, because mills take a lot of energy to run. And we're looking at how we can do that more efficiently, or maybe create our own energy and, or continue to create our own energy. We do that a lot already, and how we're using our byproducts. And then we have an analyst on our team who supports us. She's new on our team and really just digs into the data and helps us make clear recommendations from that. So that's kind of how our team is structured. But a lot of what I would say we spend our time doing is translating content to different audiences, internal, external. And sometimes I think, Lydia, I think we've said this before, and I don't know if this is common for other companies, but sometimes I feel like we're like a consulting agency. And then we like go and hop over and work with a team within the business to work on a distinct project with them. And then we get it to a place and then they own it. And then we're like, okay, great. So kind of often we incubate ideas like, can we participate in a carbon offset market? If the answer is yes, that idea ultimately is going to go and live in our business, but we might incubate it and foster it until we can make that yes, no decision. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was wonderful. And I think kind of going back to how you translate the information to different types of people, I think a lot of classes and conversations here at Yale within this space revolve around this question of how do we define impact in corporate sustainability? How do we communicate that impact to the various stakeholders? And this can be a question for Lydia too, or whoever prefers to answer first. Is this something that you guys think about a lot, and how are you guys addressing it, and what types of questions are you guys grappling with around defining impact?
Yeah, Lydia, I think this is like the perfect question for you to answer based on what you did with your internship with us. So if you want to maybe take that for how we think about impact for our sustainability strategy and implementing that, that is exactly what you focused on. And if there's anything I can fill in, I can hop in.
Yeah, Katie, I might get you to back me up with sort of the outside of 3x30, what some of that looks like. So this past summer, what I was primarily aligned with what we called the 3x30 strategy, which is sort of this like high level, what is Weyerhaeuser doing by 2030? What are 3 different focus areas where we can have impact? What are those impacts? What does that look like? When I started the summer, they had the strategy, they had the focus areas, they had a lot of the work that was already in place and already happening and already scoped out, but there was no way actually to measure it, right? And so when we're talking about measuring impact and sort of making sure that the strategy is working by having things that you can look at to say like, yeah, we did that and here's what it changed. That was basically what I did all last summer. And one of the really key things that we did was actually understand a way to just track progress, not just the success of the outcomes, but it's a 10-year strategy, right? So you need to also just understand that the work is on track and that it's happening and that we're achieving these sort of like goals and milestones that we've put out for ourselves. So we came up with a system for that. And then we're also working actively on what I like to call success metrics, which are more aligned with the outcomes. Success metrics are really hard, especially for such a like pretty ambitious and again, sort of like high level strategy, right? 3 focus areas are climate, affordable like homes, and also local communities. And when you have goals that are that up there, it takes a lot of work to break down, you know, what are we actually trying to impact, right? When we talk about climate, there could be a million things that we could measure and think about and understand as our goals and outcomes. And so what we did last summer was basically come up with a sense of what those goals and outcomes were. And I know this year that Weyerhaeuser are starting to put those goals into measurable things that they'll start to report on, but we didn't get all that way. So definitely a work in progress. I would say the one thing, you know, I think like I always want to see results, how you're measuring it, like are there things to hold teams accountable on? But the thing that's really hard to remember is it takes so much work to even figure out what the right areas are for a company to be focused on. One of the things that Katie was just saying that I think is important to think about in regards to this too is sort of the consulting team analogy, where like the sustainability team is like partnering with these different groups and looking to find areas for improvement, but ultimately Weyerhaeuser won't be more sustainable if there's not ownership on an operating level for each of those things. If there's not a team where that, you know, strategy or where that new project actually like logically fits into, and we'll continue to work on it over time. And so a big part of measuring impact and understanding what that impact should be is actually like the strategic work of what are the goals and what teams are aligned with these goals and how do we like make them do that rather than just coming up with a metric. So long-winded answer. And Katie, I'd also love to know, like outside of 3x30, if there's anything that I missed.
Yeah, I actually think that that last point, Lydia, fed really well into kind of how we think about impact. I think, you know, there's multiple levels that we can think about impact. There's like the very operational, like how many trees did we plant this year? What's the impact of that? How many acres did we reharvest? How much, you know, how many miles of stream and riparian areas did we continue to protect? So those stats and that impact is pretty easy for us to get our heads around. And I think one thing that we really focus on as a team, even as we think one level higher, how did we make people safe this year? How did we contribute to natural climate solutions? How do our products store carbon? How are we operating more efficiently? A lot of what we try to do is acknowledge our team is not doing the work, and we try to find ways that our teams are already measuring that work that we can borrow and use as a proxy for sustainability. So one thing that I think is true for any management level or middle management role is like the last thing people want to do is fill out another form. The last thing they want is like another program, another thing they have to report to. So a lot of what we try to focus on is how can we implement a new program or implement a new measure in the most simple way possible that aligns with things that our teams are already creating. And I just think I cannot stress this enough as a way to do work successfully, especially if you're trying to do like implement change or do anything new. Like when you're asking, like for us, when we are asking something about, when we're asking something from someone that's a mill manager, they're thinking of everything, especially right now. They're just trying to get like staff on the line because of COVID. You know, they're running machines right now. Our teams are, everybody is strapped for time, and the more we can make things simple for them, this sounds like so easy, but it is really hard to be simple. And I will say, like, we're not the best at it at Weyerhaeuser, and we're always trying to work on it. It's one of our parts of our culture, but it's kind of in there because we're not so good at it. Like, it's in there because we need to keep on focusing on it. So the anything you're trying to change, it's so important. Any measure of impact you're trying to think about at any level, anything that feeds into it, especially as a sustainability professional, try to align it with something that's already being collected, a program that's already happening, a system that's already in place. That really leads to success. And I know I saw a chat question come in from
Katie,
someone.
I'm actually going to steal one more question from you.
Oh, great.
And
Yeah, let's do it.
Go to the chat if you don't mind. And everyone, please feel free to add more questions into the Q&A. We really want to get to your questions as much as I have a million.
Great.
But just taking a step back from Weyerhaeuser for a second, you got your MBA where you focused on sustainability. There's people from a variety of different degree programs here, but a lot of people that have at least a portion of that in what they're studying right now. Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of why you decided to do that and how you ended up at Weyerhaeuser from that program.
Absolutely, thanks. It's a great question. So I was looking to do a career change. So I mentioned, or we've both mentioned, that I worked in the nonprofit space and the city government before coming and working at Weyerhaeuser. And I was running forest restoration programs. So in the Pacific Northwest, we have lots of our city parks have natural areas, which is really cool, like forested areas. And I was doing leading a program that did habitat restoration with engaging with volunteers in that space. And I loved my work. It was really fun. But when I looked around from a sustainability standpoint, I felt like I was already working with people who are willing to give up their free time to go pull invasive species that are thorny and prickly. And so I was kind of like preaching to the choir. And then I'll just be pretty frank, I looked around and I didn't see much opportunity for career growth for myself. I wanted to be able to grow in my career. I wanted to be able to make more money. And I didn't see a clear pathway for myself. And so I thought, and the more I looked forward in my path, in my career, it felt like my options were narrowing. And so I started looking around and thinking about what would I like to do. And I believe really strongly that business has an incredible opportunity to contribute solutions to all of the different crises and challenges that we're being presented with, but especially in the sustainability space. And so I thought I would like to make a shift into corporate sustainability, but I know absolutely nothing about how businesses operate. I had never worked in a business besides as a hostess at a restaurant, which I think is also a great way to gain skills for dealing with challenging people. So I will always plug working at restaurants. So that's where I decided to make a shift and go get an MBA. At the time, I was deeply enmeshed in the Seattle community. I wasn't interested in leaving. And when I looked around and compared the different luckily, it's a big city and I had multiple options. Seattle U has a professional MBA program that had a focus in sustainability. And so I chose that program to get my MBA. While I was getting my MBA, I got an internship with Weyerhaeuser, and then I just kept on extending that internship until I finished and then came on as a permanent student. And I know one of the things we talked about was kind of for many people that are looking to make a career shift, it can sometimes be challenging as you start thinking about the next job you want. Like, oh, well, I haven't done I've never managed a certification program or before, or like, oh, I've never done corporate sustainability work. But one of the things I really found is that if you just drop down one layer, and instead of thinking, oh, this was really important for me, instead of me thinking about necessarily the topic domain of the work that, you know, Weyerhaeuser was looking for their internships, or like I interviewed first, or I looked at a few programs, a few internship programs, or like Starbucks or other corporate sustainability companies, or companies that have corporate sustainability teams. I really instead looked at what are the skills they're looking for that would make me successful at the programs. So I was really focused on, like, I had run a program before. And so really focusing on what are the transferable skills that I had developed, and how could I couch those in terms of the work that another company was looking to do. So that was a big part of, I think, both giving me the confidence to make the career shift, and then giving me the talking points during an interview to actually get a job at the end, because that's ultimately what we want.
Yeah, that's great information as people are thinking about steering themselves and their skills towards the career that they want. So that's a great example of applying that in practice.
Great.
We have a couple questions coming in from the Q&A, so I might pivot to a couple of those now. If anyone has questions, drop them in the Q&A box in Zoom. We've got a couple. The first that came in early is from Andrew, who is a sustainable forestry professional here. He understands that North American forests are more or less sustainable. Does Weyerhaeuser have any impact strategy for protecting endangered forests around the world, or reforestation of degraded forests? So taking us back to our conversation about impact and measuring impact and metrics and things like that.
Yeah, so Andrew, I'm assuming this is specific to non-North American forests. So I will first just caveat that, as you saw on the map, we operate only in North America, so the United States and Canada. And so that really is where our work is focused. We, prior to, a few years ago, we did have land in Uruguay and Poland that we managed, and we did both afforestation programs there, and then all of that was certified. So what I will say is, let me really think. We are right now not actively participating in forest restoration programs outside of the scope of where we operate. But what I will say is that we are members of PEFC, so that's the program for the endorsement of forest certifications, and it's a sustainability certification program, and they operate very much in the international context. And so our participation with that certification program and our general and overall support of certified forests, and that being as we believe that's a really good tool for promoting sustainable forest management. We do that. And then also just trying to overall highlight the importance of working forests when they are sustainably managed. So I'm sorry, I don't have any very specific initiative that we participate in outside of the United States and Canada. That's really where we're focused as a company. But I would say overall, we are really strong supporters of working forests, and we always try to advocate for those to be managed sustainably.
Great. We have a couple more questions. I think there's two that I might combine that ask about decision making when it comes to Weyerhaeuser and land management and the decisions you're making.
Great.
One question asks about it from a sort of carbon accounting perspective, and one from a financial perspective.
Okay.
So one person asks, can you speak to the decision matrix or strategy when deciding on active management versus carbon offset development on a land holding, or somewhere in between with carbon accounting and wood products? And then the second question asks, can you speak to any challenges you encounter with your sustainability goals that align with Weyerhaeuser's financial objectives, which is a pertinent question for the business and environment community here. For example, is there any opportunity to keep oil and grass in the ground? is there a discussion about life cycle analyses of wood products with more intensive management, planting and fertilizing versus less intense? So,
whoa, okay.
A lot
let's
there, but
let's do the carbon one first, because that's a really great question. So the first thing I'm going to say is we just released our carbon record, and we're really excited about this. So I encourage everyone to go to, I think the easiest way to do it is just go to our website or Google Weyerhaeuser carbon record, and it'll pull up a PDF of our carbon record. Or you could just wait till tomorrow when our carbon record subsite goes live. We have a whole new shadow website it's beta right now, but tomorrow it goes live. So really that details how we look at our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And so I just the point of this is really to understand how we think about carbon storage and carbon sequestration in our forests. So there's just an amount of carbon that we consider it just stays in our forests, and that's our carbon storage. And then we've also got carbon sequestration that we kind of think of our carbon removals, that's what we call it. And that's what I like to think of as the incremental carbon that gets captured each year that is additional. That's probably not the right word. I want to just caveat, I am not the carbon specialist on our team. So what I will say around how do we make decisions around land management, you're right. If we're managing a tract of land, there's always going to be decisions around what's our primary management objective that we're managing for. And so what I'll say right now is that we have a pilot right now for carbon participating in the carbon offset market. So right now we are not actively making those decisions across our land base in terms of, are we managing this tract of land primarily for carbon storage or primarily for timber production? So right now our forests are being managed for the primary objective of timber production, and then they have all of the other objectives that we're managing for wildlife habitat, recreation values. And so primarily, so I just want to highlight, if we are making those decisions, it's still in a very small context. And what I will say is our foresters are asking this exact same question. When I ride in trucks with foresters, they are really excited. So especially our younger foresters, they're like, we might, moving forward, do some different things on our land. And forestry and our forest management, it might be getting a little more complex. We're really good at the type of forestry that we practice, but bringing in a whole business that is looking at a different value and how can we monetize a different value that our forests deliver it's going to make things more complicated. It's going to be a little more messy, but I think people are excited about thinking about our forests differently. So it's not a clear answer because right now we are in the space of figuring out the answer to that exact question. What I will say is that besides me just saying it's messy and kind of unclear at this point, we do have a whole model that people who are good at programming, that are not me, work with our advanced forestry team. So that's the team that is in charge of the sensing, all the LiDAR and calculating our inventory across our whole entire land base. We call this our AVO model, and we are revamping our AVO model to be able to make those decisions. So not just think about how much timber do we have on our land standing, but also how are we taking into account recreation values, conservation values, carbon values. So we're in the phase of integrating that into the algorithms that assist our teams to make decisions. So that's kind of the first thing is how do we make sure we have the data that's going to help our teams make that decision? But it's still a pretty nascent process for us. That business is not even a year old for us. So lots of collaboration and conversation still happening. So that was the one around climate. Okay, financial, how do we make financial decisions? And Claire, the other one was like, is there benefits to keeping oil and gas in the ground?
Yeah,
A
sustainability
little more.
goals as they align with Weyerhaeuser's financial
Yeah.
objectives. So opportunities to keep oil and gas in the ground, or another proposed example is a discussion about life cycle analyses of wood products with more intensive management versus less intensive.
Okay, it's really good. Let me think about how I want to approach this. So what I will say is, yeah, there's like always going to be, sorry, I'm on vacation with my family, but I'm on a working vacation, and my parents just biked by the road with my child on the bike in the back. It was really cute. Okay, sorry, slightly distracting. Okay, so thinking about, I think there's always going to be tension between decisions. Whether that's a sustainability goal versus a financial objective. One of the things we'll say is that we are committed to, as a company, growing and continuing to deliver value to all of our stakeholders, and that includes our shareholders. So maybe I'll give I'm going to move away from our timberlands, but I think this example works really well. Is we both have a production growth. We have a production growth target within our lumber mills. Within our existing footprint of lumber mills, we want to grow our production. I should know this off the top of my head, but it's by a certain amount of board feet. So that's how we measure lumber coming out of the mill. We also have a goal to decrease our greenhouse gas footprint. And what we've told our businesses is neither of those goals both of those goals are non-negotiable. We need to grow our production, and we need to meet this science-based target we have now committed to. And if we have two goals that both are non-negotiable, then really what it stands for us as a business is, okay, so how can we meet those goals in ways that we can find solutions for both? So if we're upgrading machinery at our mills, how can we upgrade that to be the most energy efficient thing possible? So right now, as we look at our capital allocation program, we're integrating a lens of analyzing greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're not just looking at, okay, how will this impact that mill's production? We're also saying, if you're putting a new piece of machinery in, we also need to know how that's going to affect our greenhouse gas footprint. So we're really integrating more sustainability context into the ways that we're analyzing things. And we are going to have to direct capital to that. So as a company, we need to think about, if we're going to meet these goals, we're going to have to fund them. And I think that's a really important thing that companies do, is as you set goals and chart the pathway forward, it's going to take resources, whether that's human or capital, all the different types of capital to make them happen. So I would say that's a really clear one, that two things at odds, but we're trying our best to accomplish them together. And then there may be things that we do for production that do increase our greenhouse gas emissions. And then we're going to have to find other ways to counter that through as we implement our greenhouse gas emissions target.
Yeah.
Then I wanted to take a moment. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think one thing that's really important to note here too is that the CEO is really on board with everything the sustainability team is doing, and I forget the terminology exactly, but is like one of the primary points of or like the steering leader.
He's our sponsor.
Yeah, he's the sponsor for the strategy. Yeah. And so when you talk about balancing like the financial and sustainability decisions, there's no better representative of doing that, and no better way to emphasize that it is important to do both than have the CEO like that involved in saying so. So yeah. I wanted to pull that in because I think it's helpful for people to understand.
Yeah, I think that is really unique, and Devin is a great leader for that. So I want to really quickly talk about the life cycle analysis piece. One thing that I will just say, we as an industry push, and Weyerhaeuser is a really big advocate of this, is really thinking about, we really advocate for whole building life cycle assessment. So whenever we think about, we're really focused on, instead of choosing between wood product A versus wood product B, and saying that, you know, the way that whether wood product A was sourced from forest A and wood product B was sourced from forest B, both are really good options whenever we compare them to steel or concrete. So what we really focus on is, we're really trying to get the industry, instead of pitting wood products against each other, because really, especially from a carbon standpoint, when we think about the amount of carbon stored in a piece of wood, that's based on really the fibers in the wood holding the carbon. It's a mass calculation, a calculation of the mass of the wood product. Really, our industry is pretty similar, and so we advocate for and use industry-wide environmental product declarations, which go into life cycle analysis assessments. And we really advocate for, as builders and architects are thinking about how can they build a lower carbon building, instead of thinking about the different wood products, really thinking about what material is going to be most useful for that goal. Can I use mass timber as a replacement for steel and concrete? And that, of course, makes sense. We are a wood products manufacturer, but we also don't make that many mass timber products. Our products do feed into the mass timber market, especially when we talk about, you know, CLT. But really what we try to focus on is, instead of, you know, this type of forest management versus this type of forest management, really wood versus another product, we think that's going to deliver the greatest carbon benefit and the greatest climate benefit, the greatest environmental benefit. If we can just say, like, more wood when it comes from sustainably and responsibly managed forests. And that's really where we advocate for certification to be brought in, and really the certification that works for the landowner is what we advocate for. So we advocate for all certifications being considered in that process. So that was sort of a roundabout answer to say, we really advocate for, instead of thinking about this wood versus that wood, we think about wood versus steel and concrete.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie. And we have run a little bit over, so I know we didn't get to all of the questions, and I appreciate, the reason why we didn't is because you guys asked really great detailed questions and Katie had some great answers. So if there's a couple that, like, we really didn't address, I'll take a look at and see if we can address it outside of the webinar. But wanted to just end and say, Katie, thank you so much for coming. This has been really a great way to start off the semester, and I've been really excited about this, and I think it went really well. And everyone, thanks for attending, and thanks for your participation and questions. Have a great rest of your day.
And if there are questions that people have specific, I'm happy to answer them. You can hand out my contact info. Lydia knows there's nothing I like better than talking, so feel free to reach out.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Katie. We appreciate the offer.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
bye, everyone.